If brute force isn't working, then it's because you're not using enough of it. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. In today's video we'll be looking at another Codex Astra Militarum datasheet, and specifically we'll be looking at the Ogryns squad. These guys have been part of the guard for a long time now, and these slightly goofy ogres in space have gone through a few incarnations. In this video we'll take a look at their rules, any obvious buffs and synergies that we can get for them on the tabletop, and how I would best try and make them work in a game of 40k. In the background, Ogryns are Homo sapiens gigantus, enormous physically powerful abhumans who come from various high-gravity worlds across the galaxy. They're often employed by the Imperial Guard as shock troopers. They're brutally strong and unswervingly loyal, but perhaps not the brightest intellectually, meaning that anything more complicated than the most basic squad maneuvers tends to go over their head a bit. Ogryns are classically armed with a sturdy Ripper gun, a weapon famed for its rugged construction, as anything that's in the Ogryns' hands is likely to get used as a makeshift club once they make contact with the enemy. Ogryns are often led by boneheads, which apparently stands for Biochemical Ogryn Neural Enhancement. Ogryns that receive this slightly disturbing treatment are often able to form their own basic tactical plans and have some limited problem-solving abilities, leading to their use as simple but effective squad leaders. So let's see what these muscle-bound killing machines can do on the battlefield then. So in the Imperial Guard Codex, the standard Ogryns squad consists of 2 Ogryns and 1 Ogryn bonehead. As per the recent chapter approved nerf, they now cost 30 points a model, meaning a minimum size squad is 90 points. They do have a pretty respectable stat line, as you might expect: a movement of 6 inches, weapon skill 3+, ballistic skill 4+, strength and toughness of 5, 3 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 7 and a 5+ save, and the Ogryn bonehead has 4 attacks and leadership 8 instead. You can include up to 6 additional Ogryns, giving you a maximum squad size of 9, and each model is armed with a Ripper gun, which can be both used in shooting and melee, and frag bombs. At range, the Ripper gun is a 12-inch range weapon with assault 3, strength 5, AP nothing and damage 1, so it will likely stack a fair amount of wounds on enemy light infantry, but that short range is going to leave you very limited for targets. In melee, it confers a simple AP -1 to the user's attacks, and doesn't confer any additional damage or strength bonuses. Frag bombs are essentially bigger frag grenades and just have a strength of 4 instead. To be honest though, in most circumstances you're going to be better off firing the Ripper gun due to that strength 5 outweighing the number of shots that you might get from the frag bomb. Ogryns have the Avalanche of Muscle special rule, which means you can add 1 to the attacks characteristic of the unit in the fight phase on any turn in which they charge, meaning that typically each Ogryn will be hitting with 4 attacks and that bonehead will be hitting with 5. In terms of keywords, unfortunately they don't have the regiment trait. They are very much Militarum Auxilia, meaning that they won't be getting any additional benefits, which is a shame as Kaschan Ogryns with +1 strength would have been very nice indeed. So overall, they're short-range brutal specialists that will put out a bunch of strength 5 attacks either at close range shooting or in melee. In terms of extra buffs that we can get for them on the table, one of the most obvious synergies is the Ministorum Priest, who can give them all an additional attack, though you do have to kind of weigh them up a little bit against just taking another Ogryn, as each additional one will get you an extra 3 or 4 attacks, plus the slightly more impressive defensive profile being toughness 5. Commissars could potentially increase their leadership a touch, which isn't bad seeing as their leadership 8, and if you are running a big squad, then you really don't want 30-point models heading for the hills. Astropaths could potentially buff them with +1 to their armor save or -1 to hit, although I must admit this strategy is far better on Bullgryn, who can have that very nice 2+ shield save or the invul save. In terms of transport options, they can embark in most transports, though lots of them limit them to taking the space of 3 models. It means that you could put them in a Chimera and have up to 4 Ogryns in there, and it could feasibly be a way of delivering them to deliver their close range punch. Despite toughness 5 and 3 wounds, they really aren't all that durable point for point due to that 5+ armor save, meaning that both anti-infantry and anti-tank weapons kill them quite easily. In terms of stratagems, the Ogryns did gain a new one from the Greater Good Psychic Awakening book, and it's Furious Charge. Basically it's a mortal wound impact hit kind of rule, which means that whenever an Ogryn finishes a charge move within 1 inches of an enemy unit, that unit suffers a mortal wound on the roll of a 4+. You can have a squad of up to 9 of them, and if you did manage to get every single one of them within 1 inch of the enemy, which to be fair isn't actually the easiest to do due to their big bases, you could be potentially having up to 4 or 5 mortal wounds on average out of them, which isn't bad to be honest, and a significant boost to their melee damage. It is a little bit situational, but if you do manage to get a moderately sized squad charging, then it could be pretty reasonable for 1 command point for the damage output, depending on what you're fighting. In terms of other stratagems, Fight to the Death could be handy for getting around some leadership problems, as you can far more afford to spend 1 command point on a D3 morale test rather than D6 when you're thinking about losing 30-point models. Take Cover could also be pretty solid on them. Maybe if they were actually in cover already, then it could get them up to a mighty 3+ save, which would be significantly harder to shift than their normal 5+. CPV rolls for charges are also good, and there's also one more from the Psychic Awakening book called Head First, which if they do happen to be charging out of a Chimera, then you just add +2 to the charge roll. If you really are hellbent on going all in on the Ogryns, then they can be quite a big squad and make some of the stratagems fairly efficient. So how would I actually use the Ogryns in game then? For a start, I'm not going to lie, the Ogryns really are struggling as a unit competitively right now. They were sort of a mediocre unit before, but they could be sort of made to work, but then Games Workshop sort of inexplicably in Chapter Approved 2019 randomly raised the points by 6 points per model. Honestly, I think that this was one of the weirdest Chapter Approved points changes that I've actually ever seen Games Workshop make. I said at the time, and it's still my opinion, that I think that they'd heard Ogryns had been good in tournaments at some stage, so were wanting to raise the points on Ogryns. I personally don't really feel that even Ogryns need a nerf to that extent, let alone the poor Ogryns, who were far inferior to them even before this massive points hike. For whatever reason, they also chose not to address it in the FAQ for Chapter Approved, so I guess these guys will be hanging on until the next one to see if they can get that change reversed. For me, the 30 points per model just really kills them as any sort of viable unit in a guard army. That 30 points would get you another 7 or 8 guardsmen. Sure, they're only strength 3, but that's 7 or 8 wounds and attacks in close combat, meaning that even just in a straight fist fight, they're pretty much just as dangerous as an Ogryn is in close combat. The guardsmen can get extra rules from their regiment traits, fill out battalions, and just have far better synergy within the Codex, let alone their massive amount of shooting that they can get with all of those lasguns. Ogryns sadly compare very poorly to Ogryns as well. Ogryns with shield and maul are 42 points. They have the same sort of basic stats as an Ogryn, but they can either have a 2+ save or 4+ invul save and an actual meaningful close combat weapon in that Ogryn maul, which is damage 2 and strength 7. The main reason that Ogryn works so well is the Ogryn Death Star sort of build that you can make when you can get their save to go up to a 2+ save with +2 to it, meaning that they're almost impervious to most enemy weapons. The Ogryns' damage output isn't truly awful compared with the Ogryns. They are a bit cheaper and that does help them, and they're a little bit better against infantry point for point in close combat, but just being so much flimsier means that they just aren't anywhere near on the same level. So at the moment, honestly, I wouldn't recommend running Ogryns in a competitive list. You'd mainly be running them just to get the challenge out of using the unit and wanting to put some cool miniatures on the tabletop. These are of course perfectly valid reasons, but really at the moment they're just not any sort of competitive unit. All that being said, in-game, if I were to run Ogryns, I'd be most tempted to run them as a sort of battle line infantry squad with a fair bit more melee punch than the standard guard units. Having a few units of them seeded through an infantry line really could make the enemy question whether or not they can actually afford to charge and tie up the infantry, and having a reasonable melee threat in a guard army can be really handy and make opponents actually have to reconsider the idea of just charging straight towards the guardsmen. I'd be quite happy to be flexible on unit size. I think small units of Ogryn work a little bit better than the Ogryns because those big 1-unit psychic buffs aren't quite as relevant on them. If you did go up to a squad of 9, then I'd certainly take a priest, a couple of astropaths to keep them safer, and if it fit with your rest of your battle plan, then you could think about having a Lord Commissar about as well to keep that leadership up a bit. As they're a bit more expensive than the standard battle line troops, and potentially a little bit more fragile in terms of wounds per point, I'd think about trying to keep them out of line of sight on the first turn if your opponent's going first, and then moving them out of cover along with the infantry advance up towards the enemy. They really are more of a bully unit than an actual damage dealing unit. As they're quite slow and quite short range, then the opponent is going to be able to get away from them if they really want to. So their main job is just scaring the opponent off the centre of the board and meaning that they know that they can't afford to put troops there unless they want to be hit by a bunch of ripper guns and shooting in close combat. And certainly remember that furious charge stratagem if and when they do charge, as you could quite simply do the maths to see how many mortal wounds you'd likely get and make a decision as to whether or not that's worth it based on the target. Overall, I do really hope that the Ogryn gets that change reversed in the next chapter approved, or even sooner in a balance update if at all possible. I think realistically speaking they could afford to go even lower than the price tag of 24 points than they had before. Maybe something about 22 might be a bit more balanced and see them on the table more. If you manage to make Ogryns work in a meaningful way on the table, then please let me know. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you can't have games where they couldn't do very well indeed. I'm just saying that on average I think that you'd be better off with infantry squads or Ogryns in almost every situation. It would be good to hear some frontline experience though, if any of you have some. Thanks for listening to another Auspex Tactics unit review. If you've enjoyed the analysis, then feel free to subscribe for more similar ones. We have plenty of stuff coming out for Astra Militarum every couple of days. If you've been enjoying the series so far, then the channel does have a Patreon page as well. That's how I can afford to dedicate more time to this channel at the expense of my regular job. If you are enjoying regularly, then any support is greatly appreciated. And if you are interested, then you can find the link in the description down below. And as always, a massive thank you to my current Patreons for making this possible. In any case, thank you very much for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.